He opens the door, bursts into the office, still holding the documents in his hand, waving them around, shouting something. He's in some kind of frenzy. He's furious. He pulls out a knife. Hello, welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol. Well, that's how our channel is. We often talk about murders, and the motivation of those who do it varies, as do the ways they later try to explain themselves. But I think for the first time on our channel, we have the story of a man so clear, a man who was sick with hatred but also suffering from delusions. And that was the motive behind his actions. I invite you to watch the next episode. From these images, from these photos, you can probably guess what today's episode will be about. This is, of course, a building that has become recognizable recently. And I think it's unfortunate to say that it became recognizable in exactly this way. This is the University Hospital in Krakow, one of the best hospitals in all of Poland. The doctors and staff are excellent professionals. It's often said that the doctors in this hospital are the last resort for people who need help in complicated cases. If the doctors from this hospital can't help, then no one can. That's why the cases here are really the most complicated. We made this episode not only because of what happened in this hospital in recent weeks, but also because of what's happening in general regarding safety in hospitals and clinics. We all know, for example, what happens in emergency rooms, how much aggression there is, drunk people, insults, blood, vomit, all kinds of vulgarities. I think that emergency room staff have already gotten used to this. They consider a day in the emergency room where these kinds of things happen as a normal workday, probably not paying much attention to it anymore. And for Dr. Tomasz Solecki from this hospital, it was supposed to be just a normal workday, except that it turned out to be the last day of his life. Well, 47-year-old Tomasz Solecki studied here in Krakow at the Jagiellonian University at the Faculty of Medicine of the Jagiellonian University Medical College. He graduated in 2003. In 2004, he passed the National Medical Examination. Then he stayed at the university, meaning at the Jagiellonian University, and became an assistant and a lecturer. Then he also worked at another hospital in Krakow, at Rydyżier Hospital. He kept honing his skills all the time. He was constantly gaining new knowledge and was always being recognized as an excellent specialist. All the more so because what he did was not limited to working at the university or in the hospital, but he also organized various kinds of symposiums.
Sympozjach międzynarodowych.
So he was a specialist, I would say, not only on a national scale, but he was a specialist on a global level. That's interesting. And privately, the doctor was a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. As a person, he was very pleasant, with a sense of humor, dedicated to his work, and conscientious. And I'm not saying this just because that's what you're supposed to say about the deceased or because I'm making something up. You can see all of this by looking at the forum posts. You'll also see posts from patients he treated, and you'll see how many good things these people wrote about Dr. Solecki, about how he saved their lives, how he helped them. Often he didn't really have to do it, but he did it out of a sense of professional duty and simply because he was a good person. Well, in this case, unfortunately, there is also a 35-year-old prison guard, Jarosław W. He was 35 years old, but he didn't really have much work experience. Just 5 years earlier, he had worked for a year and a half at the prison in Ronki. And for the past year and a half, he had been working at the remand center in Katowice. You could say that in the prison service, he was rather an average guy. He had no achievements, nor was he ever punished, so it seems that he simply did what was required of him and nothing more. He was generally responsible for security. He didn't serve on prisoner transports. One of his colleagues said that to serve on prisoner transports, to transport the accused or the convicted, you need to have nerves of steel. However, he worked in security at the detention center or previously in the prison. He simply stood guard at posts. Sometimes he would escort prisoners or convicts to the infirmary. Sometimes he would escort them to the prison gate. I'd put it that way so as not to offend him. But he was really second tier in the prison guard hierarchy among the guards who watched the prisoners. And privately, this prison guard, Jarosław W., was a loner. He lived alone. He lived in the Jędrzejów district. His parents, on the other hand, lived in Kielce, and he visited them often. Sometime in 2023, he had a bad fall. He simply fell on concrete while walking and suffered a serious elbow injury. And then, in 2023, he went to see Dr. Solecki. He had surgery with him and then started treatment. Indeed, his accident, that elbow injury, was complicated. However, from the moment he practically started treatment, something bad was happening with Jarosław. But I think it was happening more in the psychological sphere. He started saying that his health was declining, that he was feeling worse and worse. But it seemed that it wasn't just a matter of his elbow, and more like telling himself, being convinced that Dr. Solecki injected something into him during the surgery, that it was some kind of virus, and that's why he feels bad. Then this virus turned into leukemia. He simply claimed that the doctor infected him with leukemia. He thought it was all Dr. Solecki's fault because he hadn't exercised proper caution during the operation. Well, it also seemed that Jarosław was somehow aggressive all the time, because Dr. Solecki told his patients that some former patient was showing up at his office, that this patient came to him once with a knife, that he said he would kill him with that knife, although he used a different word. Well, it was clear that something was simply going on with his head, or in his head. It was clear something was wrong in his head. He kept telling his parents all the time that it was the doctor's fault that he was feeling bad, that he would end it all, that he would take a handful of pills because he wouldn't live any longer as a cripple. His parents even told him to go to a psychiatrist to start getting treatment, but he absolutely didn't want to think about it. All the time blaming and saying that this implanted leukemia makes it impossible for him to function normally. Last year, exactly on October 24, 2024, Jarosław wrote a complaint to the Patient Rights Ombudsman, of course a complaint against the doctor, writing about everything I told you about. The Patient Rights Ombudsman demanded detailed explanations and documentation about the treatment from the hospital and analyzed all of it. And on December 31, 2024, the Ombudsman wrote to Jarosław that his treatment was proper, that the doctor was not at fault in any way, and everything was conducted according to medical standards. But Jarosław absolutely didn't want to hear about it anymore. He kept blaming the doctor. He kept saying that he still had leukemia, that everyone was deceiving him, that everything that happened was the doctor's fault. It was a totally delusional condition because, after all, everyone kept telling him that it wasn't true. I think everyone was also aware of what was happening to him. I mean, everyone, probably those he had to meet with, and after all, he was still going to work all the time. So what was happening to him must have been visible in some way, visible to those around him. I'm not even mentioning the fact that his parents definitely knew about it, because they could see that he was really not doing well. Apparently, his condition worsened significantly over the last 2 weeks. And at that point, he was completely consumed by the thought and obsession that all the bad things that happened to him in life were the doctor's fault. Jarosław keeps going to work all the time. What's more, on April 23rd, he goes for tests. These are routine checkups. Of course, these tests are related to whether he is fit for work or not. Here, the doctors who examine him state that he can work without any problems, that nothing bad is happening to him. I would say this is somewhat problematic. As a guard, he always carried a weapon with him, so the fact that he passed these examinations also meant that he could have a weapon. However, something bad happened on April 23rd. I say something because it was never fully explained by the prison service. Probably Jarosław either did something at work or his behavior was somehow irrational because information about his strange behavior reached his superiors. And those superiors decided that he had to go for a psychiatric evaluation. And he has to undergo either treatment or a psychiatric evaluation. The thing is, this happened on April 23rd, and the next day on April 24th, Jarosław already went on vacation. So he was supposed to go for these tests only after returning from vacation. During those few days on vacation, he is at his parents' house in Kielce. On April 29th, he takes a knife, packs it into a backpack, and goes to Krakow. The prison guard appears at the hospital grounds around 9 or 10 o'clock. That's April 29th. He obviously knows where Dr. Solecki sees patients. There are quite a few patients waiting in front of the entrance. The doctor, as usual, is seeing more patients. He walks down the corridor for a while. At some point, he opens the door and rushes into the office. He's still holding the documents in his hand. He's waving them around, shouting something. He's in some kind of frenzy. He's furious. He pulls out a knife and starts stabbing the doctor. He stabs him many times. There are at least a dozen, maybe even several dozen, so it's clear that he's in some kind of frenzy. A terrified nurse sees all of this and tries to help the doctor in some way. He swung at her too, but didn't hurt her. But the woman was also in danger. The doctor, covered in blood, fell to the floor, and then he ran out into the hallway. Then he went toward the exit, and there in front of the entrance, the hospital staff stopped him. He was calm by then. He didn't put up any particular resistance. After a while, the police arrived and he was detained. Well, of course, after the attack on the doctor, all hell broke loose. People were screaming, calling for help. Well, it was on the hospital grounds, of course. His colleagues immediately rushed to help. In total, 20 different specialists were saving him. The surgery itself lasted for 2 hours. Unfortunately, Dr. Solecki died. The number of blows was just too great. Given where the blows landed, there was no chance of saving the doctor's life. I would also say that all hell broke loose in the media too. The minister dismissed the general director of the prison service, accusing the prison service in general of not providing enough information about Jarosław. So it seems that there were earlier signals, but the opinions and information were not very complete. All of this was alleged, and of course it became the basis for dismissing the director. But we can see that one by one some people actually knew about all this, or at least suspected it. Perhaps the guard's transfer from Ronki to Katowice was also caused by the fact that he couldn't stay there long, because something was going on with him. That's the conclusion we should draw. In total, numerous shortcomings were found. The director of the prison service became the victim of all this. And of course, there was a lot of discussion in general about safety, doctors, staff, and everything that sometimes happens, and about emergency rooms in hospitals and in all kinds of medical facilities. If we wanted to briefly summarize this matter, it can be done very quickly. A man suffering from delusions who convinced himself that he was terminally ill, blamed the doctor for this illness, took a knife and killed him. But you also remember we talked much earlier about what was happening in the prison service. Nomen omen, also that episode, the episode about the murder in Prusis, where another prison guard shot his mother-in-law, shot 2 children. We released it exactly on the day when Dr. Solecki was murdered. I even remember one of your comments. Someone wrote, "You really timed it perfectly." I would say that I didn't time it at all, that I gave plenty of reasons back then why this is happening, that not only a decision is needed, but truly radical solutions in the service, because there will be more cases like this. And basically, you could say that I kind of jinxed it. On the very same day we released the episode, that tragedy happened. Also, on a side note, that prison guard in Prusis was kind of a commando, let's call it that, in the prison service. He would go in when there was a riot or when there was an aggressive inmate, so he really had to be mentally prepared, but still, he couldn't handle it. In the case of Jarosław, I think he wasn't as mentally prepared anymore, so his psyche was much weaker. But you can see from this that both the one who was prepared and mentally strong and the one who was weak, they just can't handle all of this somehow. Maybe it's because the selection of personnel is not right, or those examinations that are done, because that seems more likely. Those periodic examinations, well, they don't really help much, because their only purpose is basically to confirm that someone is fit for work. And that's just not the case at all. Well, I would say, unfortunately, these attacks on doctors are nothing new. As you remember, Jarosław worked at the detention center in Katowice. And about 18 kilometers from Katowice, there's a town called Łaziska Górna. It's an old story because it's from 1928, but it happened in that town. I wouldn't rule out that Jarosław might have heard about this story. In that town, a miner convinced himself that the doctor had treated him improperly, that what was happening was exactly his fault. He thought exactly the same way as Jarosław did. He went to his office, and at the moment when the doctor was seeing patients, he killed him. Back then he used an axe. Jarosław used a knife. But it's not out of the question that he was. He himself could have been inspired by that story, because after all, everything happened around Katowice. It's also not out of the question that this story is simply circulating within the prison service as well. Well, we can all clearly see there's a real problem with this aggression. I'm putting aside the fact that there's more and more aggression everywhere. We also get hit sometimes, but there's definitely more aggression in healthcare as well. For example, another story literally from just a few days ago, May 25th. A 40-year-old man, Marcin, was detained. A man who lived near Wieliczka, here not far from Krakow, he was detained because he was planning to murder 3 doctors. 3 doctors, 3 gynecologists. In some way, it was supposed to be revenge on the doctors. In fact, his daughter was born 7 years ago. It turned out that unfortunately his daughter has cerebral palsy. She can't sit, she can't walk, she doesn't speak. Of course, it's a huge tragedy. He himself blamed the doctors, saying that it was their fault his daughter was born this way. There was even a court case. He took the whole matter to court. He wanted compensation. The whole proceedings lasted a year and a half. The hospital explained everything in detail. After a year and a half, it was determined that it wasn't the doctor's fault. He couldn't come to terms with it. He planned to kill the doctors. In fact, he mentioned this during the interrogation. He bought a black powder gun. He bought lead balls. And he intended to shoot 3 doctors. I would also say that a certain kind of logic is puzzling here. Basically, there is a lack of logic. Because, well, what did he want to do with all of this later? I don't know if he wanted to hide it or just get revenge. There's no reflection that after all, he's going to end up in prison for many years. He'll get a life sentence and leave his daughter, who is in terrible condition, and his wife and family without support. Well, of course, there's no ready-made solution for everything that's happening. I've mentioned this several times in the media recently. There are different kinds of things you can do here, like training the staff, like strengthening the security presence in hospitals, especially in the emergency rooms. I think at this point it's already a necessity. These are certain types of technical measures. They can somehow reduce the danger, but they won't eliminate it completely. Because many of these issues simply originate in people's minds. In some way that can also be understood. Because often the doctor is the one in whom people place their last hope. Illness, pain, whether your own or that of your loved ones. There's always this hope that the doctor will save us or our loved ones. But often that's not the case. Of course, I'm not talking about situations where the doctor is actually at fault, because those situations do happen too. But in other situations, we often just assume that the doctor is also supposed to be a miracle worker. If he's not, then all the blame for our disappointment, our pain, suffering, everything that happened falls on him. Unfortunately, it falls on him. On May 7th, there was a funeral at the Batowicz Cemetery in Krakow for Dr. Solecki. This funeral had something of a state funeral feel. The doctor was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Order of Polonia Restituta. Of course, the doctor received this cross for saving people, that he tried to do everything humanly possible so that they would be healthy, so that they would live. It's a pity that this is how it turned out for him, that he wasn't able to save his life. That's probably part of it too, something to keep in mind. And that's it for today's episode. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and of course, take care.